multiple what we called nests that were constructed all over the facility where they had rather well constructed false panels that no one knew existed, and you could sneak behind there, and they had card tables, bunk beds, microwaves. One of them even had cable TV running into it. A lot of people are not acclimated to working at night. They think they are, and the fallout will be much more intense in the beginning until you find the keepers that will willingly and happily be on that night shift for a period of time.
Welcome to American Made, the show where we discuss the labor issues impacting manufacturers today. I'm Michele Vincent, Vice President of Corp.
And I'm Joel Zimmerman, President and CEO of Corp.
On today's episode, we're going to be talking about how the third shift can be your secret weapon and also a big risk. All right, so manufacturers today are having a lot of difficulty staffing their first shifts. There's a stat that I saw somewhere that indicated that 80% of manufacturers today can't hire enough people for days. So if an unexpected order comes in, a new customer comes in, and a third shift needs to be added, what should companies be thinking about?
Well, that's going to depend on the nature of the need. If it's short term, they can usually flex some of their personnel, their experienced personnel, to the third shift and either get temporary personnel locally while they're trying to hire personnel. If it's more of a long-term or permanent shift, that adds a totally different layer of challenge, because you have to maintain the same quality during the third shift, but you're also going to face significant problems in terms of staffing it and supervising it. Most of the experienced people feel that they have earned their way not to be on night shift, so you tend to get less experienced people who are inclined to do that, and getting personnel on a production floor to work nights typically requires some incentive, and differential pay doesn't always cut it, depending upon what the headcount is. So if it's a short-term need, I think you can incentivize your own personnel to get through that, fill the order, whatever the sudden impetus was for it. The longer term one, it's a different strategy. And because of the challenges of getting people to work on nights, it should be considered a more lengthy process. And if you're going to be effective with that, you really should consider bringing in some third-party assistance with a high skill set, so you have relatively immediate productivity that is going to be supportive of the supervisors that you convince to work night shift until you can train in night shift supervisors, and that smooths the process out on a longer term or permanent scenario.
Let's talk a little bit about bringing in a temporary workforce for a third shift from a local staffing perspective. Something that I hear a lot with customers that I speak with all across the country is that they are having difficulty finding the right skill sets and people with enough experience. And when they get lower skilled people from temp agencies, that creates its own set of turnover and its own set of issues. What would you say is the biggest challenge with a traditional local staffing model?
As it relates to night shift in general, but also just longer shifts, personnel from the local area may be less inclined to stay with that work opportunity, because they feel that there are other local employment opportunities if they don't like it. So you end up having a lot of turnover from people who aren't accustomed to working night shift. And that's why a temporary solution is usually a better path, albeit at an increased cost for a period of time, because there are people who specialize in working 12-hour days and night shift, right? And they do it for a financial incentive, but they're very professional about it. You don't have the same fallout. And that gives you an operational bridge to work through your own hiring and identify those people who are going to have some staying power on night shift as a permanent employee.
One of the things that I've heard from people in terms of a challenge that they experience is, and this is kind of because of the way that local staffing works, is they'll have temporary workers coming in from one agency, and they may leave that agency maybe because they were told to leave, maybe because they didn't come back, whatever the reason may be, but then they may circle back to that employer again through a different agency. The issue there is that when you don't have enough workers in your area for manufacturing, you're all fishing from the same little pond and there's only a certain amount of workers there, right? So you can't make people mysteriously appear through that staffing model. And I think that that's where the travel staffing fits in very nicely for adding the third shift, because it will bring an instant response of qualified workers into the plant without, and this kind of applies if it's more of a long-term need where the company's hiring full-time employees, you can bring a whole group of workers in pretty quickly, provide that operational stability for the company, get that production up and running, and there's no interference in that case with the local hiring efforts, right? So when you have a regular staffing agency, they're also competing with the employer who's looking for full-time employees. So you have the temp agency hiring, you have the employer hiring, and it's all from the same limited labor pool. When you use an agency that brings workers in from outside of the area, it's fresh talent, more experienced, and like you were talking about before, these are individuals who are typically experienced working that third shift because that's where the need generally is. Would you agree with those points?
I do. If the need is to be productive rapidly, the best thing to do is bring in skilled personnel who are well acclimated to working at night and working long hours. The transitional benefit to that is those personnel, once they're acclimated and they're demonstrating high productivity within the plant, can then become the trainer for the more for the locally sourced permanent employee who may not have the same skill set. They may not have within the local community a reservoir of people at the level that the client would ideally like. So they're going to be in a situation where they have to take a less skilled but motivated person and train them on night shift using one of the contract skilled personnel. That's a good way to get a sense of their ability to acclimate to nights and maintain a focus through that. So short term, you can get your productivity up immediately. You can service your customer. You can meet the spontaneous demand, and it gives you time for your human resources to go find your permanent employees. Because when there are multiple temp agencies in the local area doing it, they don't communicate with each other. They compete with each other. So you end up recycling personnel who are not well suited to the work or had a disciplinary issue. So it actually creates confusion for the company's HR department, who's typically the one tasked to find that third shift workforce.
Let's talk about the difference between adding a third shift with temporary employees versus adding temporary employees across the organization, across all shifts. Would you say it matters from an employer perspective whether or not they're adding a whole temporary third shift versus temporary workers to the whole facility across different shifts?
Well, I think the first issue there is, are the temporary workers being provided by multiple agencies or a single entity? If it's multiple agencies, the responsibility to supervise them is entirely on the client end user. If they're brought in through a single source that is structured around having their own supervision, then there's less need on that. What you do tend to end up with is a little bit of a shift change shenanigan scenario where sometimes the existing employees will not leave the next shift as prepared as they should be to start the production line up. So in that case, intermingling people is beneficial to the end user client because you've got more experienced eyes who have a permanent presence at the facility working with the temps and watching what's going on. You don't have this completely isolated third shift just training your supervisors. So, it's an issue of, as most things, the culture in the facility, whether or not it's union. If it tends to be a union plant, they're much less accepting of the presence of temporary personnel, and especially where they're coming from and what their typical service package is, whether it involves labor disputes as well. So if there's a labor dispute component to what the entity is doing, the union is going to be very upset that they're in there. And the other thing with night shift is having good eyes on it. As you may remember from one of the facilities we ran that had a very robust night shift with quite a few people on it, they actually had us, this was a labor dispute scenario, they had us go through and start cleaning and repairing and painting the facility, large steel mill. And in going through that, we actually uncovered several hidden areas that had been built by the night shift employees with false walls and bunk beds and televisions and microwaves, and they would work their day job, go and punch in at the plant and immediately go to sleep, and they disappeared into the facility, and nobody knew where they were. And that was going on for years and years. So you do tend to have a different mindset in some cases for those working on night shift if there isn't consistent supervision that matches what the expectations of the day shift are.
I do remember hearing that story. I was not here for that, I don't believe, but I do remember hearing that. And the reason that I wanted to ask that question is that I know we had a project recently, somewhat recently, I think in the past couple of years, where a client had brought us in, put us on the third shift. It was a union plant, and there was that us versus them mentality. And, there's some shenanigans, right, with, I think, putting pieces of equipment where they shouldn't be. And so when the night shift came in, we couldn't find what we needed to do our job.
Locking things up.
Yeah. So there was issues with that. But we've always taken the stance that we're there to help the client in whatever way makes sense. So that was what they thought would be the best scenario in that case. But then they discovered that it was not. And so then they ended up changing how they brought us in. I don't know if it was a second wave deployment or while we were there, maybe you recall, but they ended up doing it differently at some point moving forward, where then we were spread out across all the shifts, not on our standalone shift. And that just created a more uniform experience. And I think for our listeners who maybe didn't pick up on what Joel said in terms of the staffing agency and their experience with labor disputes, most of the agencies that provide traveling workforces like we do so in strike situations, in non-strike situations. And so when you bring in that type of a company to a union plant and they're aware of that service by that provider, it's not necessarily a happy environment for them to be in. And so that in itself can provide a little bit of friction. And that's why, in part, we decided to step away from strikes. We saw the need in the market for traveling workforces due to labor shortages and skills gaps that are impacting manufacturing. Companies started coming to us and saying, can you provide the same service without the picket line? And so, of course, we can do that. It's actually a little bit more enjoyable. People don't want to kill us, which is nice. And so we ultimately got to the position where we decided that we don't want to have that strike flag waving over our head when we are entering union plants. And we do union plants and non-union plants, so it's not an issue in every scenario. But we want to make sure that when we're in there, we're creating the best sort of culture and environment in our client's facility.
Right. And that scenario you're talking about, you actually started with that entity as their strike provider for a master agreement for all their production facilities.
Way back in the day.
So we were known to the entity and to the workforce because of that.
Yeah.
And they did come to us when they had a seasonal need where they didn't have 12 months of work for an entire shift for a specific seasonal-based product. And they brought us in to assist with that because they couldn't get the local personnel. And ironically, their regular workforce, which happened to be union, was complaining vigorously about the mandatory overtime. So we came in, we alleviated the pressure, but we were still actively involved in the strike business at that time, which created some chafing.
Yeah.
Over time, once they understood that we're there to keep the facility operating at an effective level, right, non-strike, but even when we would go do strike work for them, we never were there to take the job. We were there to keep the job warm for the union to come back to while the two sides work out the differences. The difference in going in a non-strike setting is you're still that entity coming into the plant, and the union provides services to its membership in terms of the work rules and negotiating and having a really solid structure. But ultimately, they're in the dues collection business. So the more employees that they have at a company, the better it is for the local and ultimately the union. So in this scenario, it was a situation where there isn't 12 months worth of work, and that overflow is being pushed onto the union personnel, which they didn't really appreciate. We went in, alleviated the seasonal pressure, and actually became friendly with them. And one of the most shocking things, which has never happened in the prior iteration of Matty Corp, was the union actually told us we were going back again the next year, and they were looking forward to us
Yeah. Yep. Interestingly,
via Facebook.
Interestingly, though, for that particular project, while we were there, they entered into negotiations, right? And needed to have strike replacement workers at the ready
Right.
in case their union employees went on strike. And they came to us. Correct me if I'm wrong here. My brain's not.
No, that's exactly right. They
yeah.
came to us and said, "Can you, stand in if we do have a labor dispute?
Yeah.
You already have an entire workforce here." And again, a bizarre evolutionary twist. I refused it because it would damage all the good work we did building a relationship with that union as a non-strike presence, but also becoming a non-strike staffing provider.
So that plant did not go on strike, though, when they asked us for that, right?
That's correct.
Was that a separate contract from the one that did go on strike? Because they did go on strike, didn't they?
I think they had no, their competitor went on strike. Our client did not.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's what it was.
So it didn't happen.
Yep.
But we did force them to seek other services if that plant that we were servicing did.
And that would have been a bad situation for us to be in if we had taken on that additional work at the site. And then, I mean, we remained there for years.
It was a logical ask for the client because you're there, you're already doing the work,
Right.
You're familiar with this type of service. And at that point, we explained to them, we're not doing that anymore. And here are the reasons why. And please balance that cost decision against the long-term detriment to the relationship you have here, which is our returning seasonal presence. And a lot of the time, we're bringing the same employees back, so they're going right back into the same position on the production line. So
Yeah.
it's a very seamless thing that benefits not only the entity, but also the union membership there.
Yeah. And I think that's a nice aspect too of the manufacturing workers who prefer to do this type of work. It's kind of like gig work for manufacturing, right? They can take on multiple projects a year. They go out and they work third shift or whatever shift they're on. They work a lot of hours and then they get to go home and take a break. So they go out, they work really hard, and then they go home. But when there is that sort of seasonal need from a customer, then, we can pull them back into it, which is nice. That's something that I get asked a lot in terms of the employees that we're putting out. Are they, people you've worked with before? Are they new? And what I always tell people is that it is a mix of both. We do have a core group of employees who just prefer this type of work, and we do have the ability to put them at sites project after project when that type of a need arises, which is nice. Let's end with this. Would you say that the myth that nobody wants to work third shift, do you think that's true?
I think all things being equal, that is absolutely true. But if the proper incentives are provided to those on night shift and it's coupled with a pathway to a career that gets you onto day shift, that's the way to approach it. You're asking someone to give up regular daytime existence in many cases. There should be a financial incentive and a training incentive to that. So if they show promise and they work hard, they can continue into the sunlight and into a strong career. And you replenish the night shift and you feed the day shift with that.
Yeah, and I would say that from our perspective, that is not necessarily true.
We love night shift.
We are always on night shift and third shift, so and there's not a lot of pushback on that. But doing this type of work is very different, right? So it's incentives, there's the overtime hours, there's the added bonus of I can go travel to a new plant in a new location, work really hard for 3, 4, 5 months, whatever the duration might be, and then go home and spend a lot of quality time with my family and do whatever I want to do when I'm done, and then pick it up again next time. So I think, at least from our perspective, I don't think that that's necessarily true. I don't think we get a lot of pushback from anybody that we talk to when we tell them that that's where they're going to be.
We don't, but we also tend to recruit people who are accustomed to traveling for work. So they understand that the night shift is usually the first one that we fill. We're not there for the easy tasks. We're there for the difficult ones. Otherwise, the clients wouldn't need us. And again, it comes down to incentive. We do provide an incentive to personnel to come out, not on a shift basis, but just in general, to come be away from your family, work 6 days a week, sometimes 7, long hours, but at the same time, you're being well paid, you're getting guaranteed overtime, and you're also learning skills that makes you even more employable, even within your craft. You're going into different production environments that makes you more versatile for the next potential project. I think a key takeaway from this segment is that third shift challenges aren't just about getting employees to come in and work on the production floor. It's about finding willing, experienced supervisors who will be present on that third shift, especially as it is implemented to maintain the quality of the facility, coupled with providing a financial incentive, which we spoke about earlier, to those employees who are considering coming into it. Also expect you're going to have a more difficult process than daytime. It's not the same. It's the same plant, maybe the same product, but it's a completely different challenge. A lot of people are not acclimated to working at night. They think they are, and the fallout will be much more intense in the beginning until you find the keepers that will willingly and happily be on that night shift for a period of time.
Third shift only works when you have the right team in place. We send crews who are used to working third shifts and used to working long hours. If you'd like a staffing quote, please visit us at maddiecorp.com. Let's hop into our news commentary segment. So I found an interesting article on Procter Gamble scaling its ability to run fully automated factory shifts that remove human supervision. They have a 4-hour span known as the dark shift that's run entirely through automation and robotics. It's at a Gillette factory in Berlin. What say you about that?
Be curious to understand if they're running a full production run during those 4 hours or a limited production run that's more conducive to full automation. If they can do it for 4 hours at full production, then you should be able to do it for 8 hours, which is something else for that factory's workforce to consider.
So it says that it includes movement of materials across the floor from ingredients to finished product. And it's actually getting an 88% favorable rating from the employees at the plant. People are saying that they're thrilled that they get to spend the evenings with their family instead of working that third shift.
It's a very successful maneuver by Procter Gamble, which is a great company. If their people are happy, nobody likes the third shift, as we've discussed. So if you can come up with a solution to avoid putting humans on it, that's great. And I think they should continue.
I'm actually a little bit surprised that the employees would be. I get that they're happy about it. Obviously, they're not working that third shift. But my thought would be, is this eventually going to replace me? That would be.
That is a concern that's out there in the space. And it's not going to happen imminently, but if you look at recent news regarding robotics production, Mr. Musk is committed to having 1 million Optimus robots sold by the end of a 10-year period.
I would think, though, that even if you do have all of that automation and robotics in your plant and you're running without the humans, you're still going to need maintenance on those. So there's still going to be an aspect, right? Because if something goes wrong and there's an issue with production, I mean, someone has to deal with that.
Again, it's all circumstantial, so it depends on how good the AI and the robotics become and what their diagnostic capabilities are and their physical capabilities to get inside machinery and fix it. So eventually, all the tasks that can be currently done will eventually be something that can be done by a robot, I would think.
Not good news for us.
No.
Before we jump into Love It or Hate It, if you found this episode useful, we'd love it if you could head over to Spotify and leave us a rating. Just search for American Made. Let's jump into Love It or Hate It. Third shift should have the same access to maintenance, quality, and HR support as day shift. Love it.
I love it because it is very important for there to be equal treatment in both shifts, especially the third shift people. They don't want to feel like second-class employees or second-class citizens within the facility. And just from a quality control and a uptime standpoint, you want to have maintenance occurring when the work is occurring, so it doesn't impact the off shift. And you also want to maintain safety.
Very well said. Like I have much more to add to that one.
Great. Just stick with my love it. We both love it.
We love it. Shift differentials alone are not enough to attract and retain third shift talent. Love it.
Okay, I'll hate it.
All right, so I think that is a factor, but there's so many things that go into whether or not someone would want to work a third shift beyond what's even happening in their plant. Could be their home life, right? They could have kids, they could have a spouse, they could have not, they might not have a spouse. There's just a lot of factors that would contribute to whether or not someone would be attracted to that type of work.
Well, I agree with some of what you said about the third shift differential. It is important. I acknowledge that they feel that they have the same work environment as the day shift personnel, but night shift tends to be staffed by newer employees at a more junior level at an earlier stage in their career, and the incentive pay is a primary driving force to get them to take the work.
Next one, night shift can't succeed without a full-time experienced supervisor on site. Love it.
Okay, why do you love it?
Because there are instances where we have been in plants where there hasn't been a supervisor, at least from our client's perspective on site, right? We have the skilled operators or skilled supervisors from our team who are able to manage the crew that we do have in there. So that's why I love it.
It's true, and we do earn that trust over time, but our role is not quite the same as permanent employees. And I think one of the most neglected areas when implementing a third shift is having the right personnel there to make sure that the implementation goes smoothly and all the little details that only come from significant experience are observed. And that's one of the things that is very hard to get a volunteer for unless you have a very dedicated manager. So that's one of the things that I think people need to really focus on when they're going to do this, is to make sure that the only difference between day shift and night shift is whether the sun is up.
In our next episode, we tackle the real reasons you can't find talent and how to fix it. For now, one last thought.
We showed how to turn third shift into an advantage while protecting safety and retaining employees. Remember, without people, there is no production. Until next time.